Billie Eilish's vocals always sound so clear, present, and cinematic. I'm going to show you how to achieve that same vibe and clarity with your own vocals, even from a home studio.
I can only ask why in this barren desert I see shadows.
So it's all about a mixing concept called imaging. I'll walk you through 7 key steps that I took to get this vocal sounding clear, present, and upfront.
You still want more? Take all of me. I'll give my strength till I can speak.
These are the vocals of Chloe Edgecombe, who's an amazing singer. She was recently one of the top finalists in Got Talent Argentina, and she was amazing to work with. Okay, so before we dive into all the details, I want you to understand one thing. The big idea behind a great mix is a concept called imaging. In a song which has great imaging, like many of Billie Eilish's songs, you can almost picture the different instruments, the different parts of the music, as if they're all right in front of you. So think of it like this. When you close your eyes and listen to, say, a Billie Eilish song, her voice often feels like it's right there in front of you. It's solid and it's crystal clear. And if you close your eyes, you can almost see her in front of you. You could almost reach out and touch the vocals. That's powerful imaging. And when this concept clicked into place for me, suddenly mixing made a whole lot more sense. And that's exactly what we're going for with your vocals today. We want them to have this same cinematic quality, that same crystal clear presence. And so everything we do in this process has that goal in mind. So with that big idea of imaging in mind, let's jump into the first step of the process. So step 1 is start with a great recording. I know this might sound obvious, but trust me, it's crucial. Your microphone is your best friend in this whole process. It's like a glove. You want to find one that fits your unique voice perfectly. Just because a mic works for one person doesn't mean it'll work for you. So don't be afraid to experiment and try out a few different ones. Some studios even let you test them out to find your perfect match, and it's worth the effort, I promise. And the other factor is make sure to get a clean recording, because this is the foundation of your mix, and no amount of fancy mixing tricks can fix a bad recording. I've been there. Back in the day, I used to work with pretty average recording setup. I'd spend hours fighting against the recording, trying to get a crystal clear sound. But if it's not clean at the source, there's only so much you can do. Some people have great home recording setups, but in a lot of cases, it's probably cheaper to go to a local studio and get it done, where they've got the equipment, they've got the treatment, and they know what they're doing. Because when it comes to mixing, you don't want to be fighting your own recording. You want to be enhancing it. So take the time to get a good, clean take. It'll make the rest of the mixing process so much smoother and more enjoyable. So if you listen to the raw recording with nothing done to it,
In this barren desert I see shadows of what once. Can only ask why in this barren desert.
it does need some mixing work, but it's clean enough and it's a strong enough performance to move forwards. So now that we've got a solid foundation, let's move on to step 2. Step 2 is EQ. Find your place in the mix. So yes, EQ is all about shaping the tone of your music, boosting highs and lows and mids, but it's also a powerful tool for imaging. Remember, we want these vocals to feel present and upfront, and we want them in the right space in the mix. So if you listen to a lot of Billie Eilish's music, you'll notice her vocals often occupy that higher space, almost floating above everything else. There's nothing really competing with her up there, and we can use EQ to achieve a similar effect. By boosting the right frequencies, we can lift your vocals up in the mix, making them feel more present and airy. One way to achieve all this is by boosting the highs, and this will add clarity and brightness, and it will make your voice feel more forwards in the mix, and it'll also make your voice feel higher up in the mix space. On the flip side, we also want to cut any frequencies that are making your vocal sound muddy, muffled, or distant, because these frequencies can clutter up the mix, and they also make your vocals sink lower down. They sort of add flab, and they push your vocals further back in the mix. So we're sculpting, we're carving away the unwanted bits, and we're highlighting the best parts of your vocal, while also positioning your vocal up high in the right vertical space. So if you listen to what this EQ is doing, when I turn it on, the vocal suddenly rises up and becomes just that much more present.
Desert, I see shadows of what once.
Also, a little later on, I'm using a Pultec EQ. Again, you can see how I'm making a pretty large boost at 16 kilohertz, adding a lot of air and presence to this vocal. If I turn it off,
in this barren desert,
and then turn it on,
I see shadows of what was.
I'm working incrementally to add things bit by bit, rather than trying to do everything all at once. So if you turned all of the EQ off,
Barren desert, I see shadows.
the vocal sinks lower, it feels heavier, there's more weight to it, and it feels more dull and kind of boring. Once you add this EQ,
I see shadows.
it's a lot more clear, a lot more present, and a lot higher up in the mix. So experiment with EQ, find those sweet spots to make your vocal shine and image well. Step 3 is using compression to create solidity and density. Now, when we're thinking about imaging, compression isn't just about controlling dynamics. It's about making your vocal feel solid and giving it a rock solid position in the mix. So think of it like this. Imagine your vocal is a cloud. It's kind of wispy and undefined. Compression helps to solidify that cloud, giving it a clear shape and presence. And I owe this way of thinking to Michael White, by the way, a brilliant mix teacher. He's Whitney Houston's engineer for several decades, I think, and his teachings have been extremely impactful on the way that I think about music. So if I play it without any compression and then with compression, hopefully you'll hear the difference in solidity and density. Here's without.
I can only say despite all these pretenders.
And now with.
I can only say despite all these pretenders.
So do you hear how it creates more solidity, more density in the mix? I'll show you what I'm doing. I've got FabFilter Pro C2. This is again something I learned from Michael White, that it's a really low threshold, -40, and that means it's always compressing. But the attack is almost instantaneous. The release is almost instantaneous. And so what it's doing is it's just following the shape of the music and just always compressing about 2 to 3 decibels. And what that means is it just adds thickness and weight without messing about too much with the character of the music. So you can watch on screen what it does.
I can only say
So it just helps to even things out and add a little bit of thickness. It's super subtle. So it's fast compression to even out the dynamics of your vocal. And this creates a more consistent and stable vocal, which helps it to sit firmly in the mix. It creates more solidity. It's always compressing, so it's always gently increasing the solidity. But compression can do more than that. Certain compressors, like the classic Blue 1176, can also add a sense of pop and presence to your vocal. So it's like giving an extra boost of energy, making it jump out of the speakers. So again,
I see shadows of what once was.
and now with.
I see shadows of what once was.
It's an amazing compressor for this kind of vocal style. So again, when I compress, I'm not thinking about dynamic range. I'm really thinking, how does this enhance the imaging? That sense of solidity and density. So experiment with different compressors and settings and listen for that solidity, that density, that clear 3D presence in your vocal. Compression is your tool to make your vocals feel tangible and powerful in your mix. All right, step 4, let's add some warmth and richness and life with saturation. Now you might have noticed I've been using a lot of vintage style plugins throughout this mix. I'm using the Blue 1176, I'm using this old Pultec EQ. That's because these plugins do more than just compress or EQ. They also add their own subtle harmonic character. Now when I first started out, I used to think vintage would mean old sounding, and I didn't want my music to sound old sounding, but it's actually the opposite. Vintage style plugins and techniques, when used well, can actually make your vocal sound even more alive and modern. They make things feel more real and tangible, and it adds even more body, aliveness, solidity to your imaging. So that's how saturation enhances imaging. We can also use tape saturation, like I do at the end here, to add even more of those subtle harmonics and distortions to your vocal. Think of it like adding color and dimension to a painting. It makes your vocals feel thicker, richer, and more alive. I can't stress enough that harmonics are your friend here. They're these little extra frequencies that give your vocal character character and depth, and it's what makes them sound less like a digital recording and more like a real breathing performance. And if you were to just use a 100% clean digital EQ or compressor, it wouldn't have the same aliveness to it. So don't be afraid to experiment with saturation. Find that sweet spot where it just adds the right amount of warmth and life to your vocals without going overboard. It's all about finding that balance between clarity and character. So here's without that tape saturation.
I place in you trust, you place in me fear. All I intended was to have a plan.
And here it is with that tape saturation.
Place in you trust, you place in me fear. All I intended was to have a place.
Alright, step 5. It's time to create some space with reverb and delays. Now remember the big idea of imaging. We want your vocals to feel like they exist in a real 3-dimensional space. That's where early reflections come in. Think of early reflections as the first bounces of sound that hit your ears after the initial sound source. And so what they really do is they give your vocals a sense of place in a room, like they're actually being sung in a specific environment. So here's with no early reflections.
I place in you trust, you place in me fear. All I intended was to have a plan.
And here's now with early reflections. Listen for the sudden sense of space. It's subtle, but you can feel it.
I place in you trust, you place in me fear. All I intended was to have a place.
Now this is subtle, and it might sound weird when I just solo the vocal independently, but in the context of the whole mix, it makes a huge difference for her to feel like she's singing in the room with those instruments. But that's imaging. We feel like we can actually place the vocals in the room in front of us. And next to early reflections is reverb. Reverb adds depth and atmosphere to your vocals, making them sound more expansive and giving them a sense of space. It's like expanding the walls or the depth of that room that we've already created with early reflections. So here it is with reverb.
I place in you trust, you place in me fear. All I intended was to have a place.
That sounds like a lot on its own, but once the full mix is going, that tail really gets lost amongst the other instruments. So finally, for creating space, let's talk about delays. Delays create those subtle echoes that you hear trailing off after the main vocal. They can enhance the tail of the reverb, add texture and a sense of how far back the room goes. And this is where things start to get really cinematic. So to the end of this reverb, I've actually added a delay, just so that the reverb tail keeps going subtly. And I've also created a ping pong delay here, which is actually sent to the reverb. So there's lots of delays feeding that reverb. It now sounds huge and cinematic. Here's with no space.
I place in you trust, you place in me fear. All I intended was to have a place.
And here's with lots of space.
I place in you trust, you place in me fear. All I intended was to have a place.
So play around with different reverb and delay settings and listen for that sense of space, that feeling of depth and dimension. It's these effects that will truly transport your vocals from a simple recording to a more captivating, immersive experience. Now, step 6 is the secret sauce, Antiphase. This is where things get really interesting. Now, this might sound a bit technical, but stick with me. Imagine your vocals are like a ball. Now, normally when you listen in stereo, that ball is sitting right in the middle, in between your left and right speakers. Just got hand cramp. With Antiphase, we're going to make that ball feel like it's expanding outwards, almost like it's wrapping around your head. Here's how we do it. And again, I owe this trick completely to Michael White, an amazing mixing teacher. So with Antiphase, we take all that lovely reverb and early reflections that we created and we send it to a new channel. And then we do something a bit sneaky. So on its own, that channel will sound like this. It's just the reverb, but then we do something a bit sneaky. I make this mono, so it's exactly the same thing now in the left and right channel, so it feels like it comes straight down the center. It sounds like this. And then I flip one side of the audio. I invert the phase. So I literally flip the sound wave of one side upside down so that the left and right sides are playing the complete opposite of each other. Yes, left and right speakers are playing 100% the opposite of each other. And so it's pure side energy. You can only hear this in stereo or on headphones because it's pure side energy. There is nothing in the middle. And I know this sounds weird, but just try it out at home before you bash it because it works. So this is what it sounds like on its own. Pure side energy. On headphones, it almost sounds like it's coming from behind you. And if you're listening at home on a phone or a mono speaker, you might not be able to hear that at all. I know this sounds really weird, but try it at home before you bash it because it works. It creates this really cool immersive effect where the vocal feels much wider than the speakers. And it's like your vocals pop out of the speakers. They're coming at you from all sides, not just from the center. And it wraps around you more. So listen just to this vocal without antiphase.
I place in your trust, you place in me fear.
And now with antiphase.
I place in your trust, you place in me fear. All I intended was to have a plan.
I'm on headphones right now just to make this video, but on speakers, it's even more obvious. Now, here's the thing. You will only hear this effect if you're listening in stereo. The moment you switch to mono, it completely disappears. So if you are listening at home on mono or on a small speaker, you probably won't even hear anything. But that's okay because in mono, your vocal will tend to sound relatively louder anyway. So you won't need this trick. But in stereo or on headphones, it does make a difference. It helps to pull the vocal out of the speaker, make it more present, wider, more 3D, and it makes that vocal reverb just wrap around you a bit more. That antiphase trick is like a magician's secret. And it's also how they create those sounds that feel like they come from behind you if you've ever played video games on headphones or used Dolby Atmos on headphones. So I know it's weird, but give it a try because it's my new favorite trick. And step 7 is then just creating extra layers for impact. So now that we've got the core of your vocal sound established, we want to add some extra layers for impact. So as the song goes on, she gets more aggressive and I add more effects to create more edge and impact. So first up is the doubler. So the doubler on its own sounds like this.
I'm getting torn and forced to go.
So think of this as creating a subtle clone of your voice, slightly detuned and panned way out to the sides. So it adds some thickness, dimension, and a bit of extra energy, especially in those more intense moments of the song. I know that Billie Eilish normally records multiple takes of her vocals and pans them out really wide, so it feels like she's whispering into your ears all the time. This is a way to do that if you don't want to track your vocals multiple times. And while it sounds really obnoxious on its own, of course I just blend it in subtly with everything else. So you barely even notice it, but it does add dimension. Here it is without.
I'm getting torn and forced to.
Here it is with.
I'm getting torn and forced to.
So it just helps the voice to occupy more space, which is really important when I've got loads going on in this arrangement, a full orchestra behind her. She needs to occupy more space. Then we can get creative with some additional effects. So I stole this next thing directly from the No Time to Die mix. So this is a bona fide Billie Eilish vocal trick. First, listen to what it's doing. Kind of crazy, but it happens in No Time to Die. What the chain is this dirt echo, which basically creates a distorted echo. We remove any low mud to avoid any weight holding us down. And then there's this fun pan man set to spaz random, which just makes the panning go crazy. Again, in isolation, it sounds super weird, but I just tried it out because it was in No Time to Die, and it creates this cool, unpredictable movement that keeps things interesting. And again, it just helps her to take more space and add more depth and edge to the sound. Here's without.
I'm getting torn and forced to.
And here it is with.
I'm getting torn and forced to.
So you can just hear this exciting movement around and occasional moments of edge and distortion, which helps to back the vocal up. So as things get more intense in the mix, the distortion gives it even more solidity and edginess. So remember, the key to achieving that cinematic Billie Eilish vocal sound is imaging, making these vocals feel solid, clear, and right there in front of you, but also adding a sense of dimension and space to her vocal mix. It's a journey, not a destination. So don't be afraid to experiment and try new things, and most importantly, trust your ears. Every vocal is different, so what works for one song might not work for another, but with a bit of practice and patience, you'll be able to craft these captivating, immersive vocal mixes that will hopefully have your listeners immersed in your voice. So if you have any questions or want to share your own mixing experiences, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you.
I'm getting torn.